Well, let's start at the beginning. So, number one, I'll just kind of go fast and stop me if I get something wrong or if you want me to explain. But it should be pretty straightforward. And as I said earlier, but I just made last hour when I found out I might be exposed. I went ahead and made the actual final, and the actual final is 50 questions with 2 free response. So it's, I guess, similar to this. Should be basically the over the same stuff. So number one, and this will be due for a grade, so just turn this in on Classroom once you're done with it. But number one, you try to sell a car using the facts of the car such as engine size. That would be central. Number two, you make a car commercial that utilizes a really catchy song in the background. That would be peripheral. 3, convincing someone with this method results in longer lasting attitude change. That would be central. 4, this type of motivation will not work very well unless the person is motivated to listen. That is also central. 5, moving on to the types of peripheral persuasion. Saying limited time only works on scarcity. B. 4 to 5 doctors recommend Crest toothpaste. That would be C, authority. 7, car salesman was very nice to you and smiled a lot. That would be F, liking. 8, the car salesman gave me free tickets to the zoo just for coming in to talk. That is A, reciprocity. B. Sorry, I was distracted. 9, not B. Over 2 million sold. That is consensus. E. 10, a new item makes sure to identify itself as from the same company that brought you. Would be D, commitment and consistency. 11, Michael Jordan makes commercials for Hanes t-shirts. Still authority. So you can have actual authority figures or celebrities. Either one works for authority. 12, conscious, fully aware prejudice against a person or group of people. That would be explicit prejudice, being fully aware of your prejudice. A statement which is applied to an entire group of people. For example, all Canadians are nice. That would be a stereotype. A. 14, Joe calls himself colorblind. It says that he treats people equally, but in reality, he doesn't like Canadians. That would be C, implicit prejudice. That's being prejudiced without your knowledge. 15, Joe doesn't pick a Canadian for his baseball team, even though he is better than some of the other choices. That would be discrimination, which is behavioral, kind of like behavioral prejudice. Actually acting on prejudices. 16, when you interact with a person, you tend to like the person more. That's the mere exposure effect. One of the ways to possibly fix prejudice. 17, when an out-group does something bad, we tend to blame them. But when one of our friends do something bad, we make excuses. That's the fundamental attribution error, which will likely be one of your free response questions. Fundamental attribution error says that we overuse, let me make sure to get this right, we overuse internal or dispositional attributions for other people, or in other words, when they do something wrong, we blame them. But when we or our in-groups do something wrong, we make a situational or external attribution, or we just make excuses. So that is the fundamental attribution error. 18, the reason we like McGinnis students more than students from another school, that would be the in-group bias. And here it says in-group, out-group bias, but one of the main reasons for prejudice in the first place. Humans tend to like in-groups more than out-groups. 19, you tend to like your teachers more than the teachers you haven't had yet at McGinnis. That's the mere exposure effect again. 20, the psychological reason members of another race often look more similar to each other than members of your own race, and it doesn't have to do with just race. It's any out-group versus any in-group. That would be the out-group homogeneity effect, also called the other race effect. 21, when reading a news story, people tend to interpret that story in a way that is consistent with their pre-existing beliefs about the world. That's the confirmation bias. You interpret information and data in a way that is consistent with what you already believed. 22. Oh, now we're getting into sampling methods from your survey. Picking some people at your convenience during lunch, that would be haphazard. It is going to be kind of sort of random-ish, but not really. Standing in the senior door hallway and surveying every 7th person. That would be systematic. 24. Make sure your sample have exactly half boys and half girls. That's going to be non-random on purpose, and that would be stratified. Stratified to represent demographic groups in the way they fall in your actual population, which random assignment might not represent demographic groups that way. So stratified is intentionally non-random to represent demographics the way you want. 25. If you survey all of stagecraft or all of a group, that would be cluster. 26. Put all the students' names in a hat and pick 20 names. That is truly random, so that'd be A, random. Great. Tom works for a music producing company. His boss wants to put together a survey about a new album that one of the artists recently produced. 27. What might a demographic question for that survey be? Demographic are questions not about the topic of your survey, but about the people taking your survey. So that would be A, male or female. Nothing to do with music, but it has to do with the people taking it. What might an open-ended question for that survey be? A is close-ended. B is open-ended, because there's an infinite number of things you can say to the question B. C is close-ended, because you can only say 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. And D is close-ended. You can only say one of these 4 things. 29. Close-ended. Well, that's interesting. That's a bad question then, because the answer to 29 would be A, C, and D. Fun question. The only answer that it's not is B. All right. Try and look through the final and make sure there's not a question like that. But if there is, just email me and then I'll end up throwing it out. So if there was a question like that on the final with multiple correct answers, you just put one of the correct answers and then I'll fix it on the back end. It'll be fine. But I'll also try not to have a question like that. 30. What might a Likert question for the survey be? Likert is it's a sliding scale of 1 to 5, 1 to 7, 1 to 10. Any of those is Likert. And it's on a scale of 1 to 5, how much do you like the new album? That would be Likert. 31. You're afraid that if you study hard for your economics final, you might not do well. 31 is starting with the cognitive dissonance questions. It's 31. You're afraid that you might not do well if you study, so you don't study. And that is self-handicapping. Intentionally making it less likely that you'll succeed. So if you fail, you can blame that and not the fact that you are bad. 32. Your best friend got a car as a birthday present, but you had to work all summer to save up. The car, and it is a much worse car than your friends, but you enjoy it more than they enjoy theirs, and that is effort justification. Our tendency to like things that we had to work hard for. 33. Ellen doesn't really like Sally until she helps Sally study for a hard math test. Ever since then, Ellen likes Sally much more. That is the Ben Franklin effect. If you do a favor for someone, you like the person more. Yes. Because it would be dissonant for you to do a favor for someone and not like them. So you change your attitude. 34. Your biology class has a total of 5 tests. You studied very hard for the first 2 and made a C on both. Depressed and disappointed, you don't even study for the next 3 since you probably do poorly on them anyway. That is E, learned helplessness. Repeated failing makes you stop trying. 35. Bob was trying to decide whether to go to OU or OSU. He had friends at both schools, and the programs he was interested in were about equal in both schools. He ended up going to OSU and now is a huge OSU fan. That would be B, post-decision dissonance. When you make an unalterable decision, you tend to like the decision that you made. Moving on to norms. 36. Wearing only one sock. That's folkway. Folkway is not morally wrong, it's just awkward. Moray has a moral component to it, either on a very small end or all the way up to a lot. And taboo is extremely morally wrong and usually cross-cultural. 37. Not taking your hat off in mass. That would be B and moray. 38. Holding a handshake for too long. There's nothing wrong with that, it's just weird. A, folkway. 39. Talking too loud in a library. That's also a folkway. A. 40. Murder. That's not good. C. Taboo. 41. Swearing in class. That would be B. Amore. 42. Going on to the conformity experiments. Solomon Asch, Stanley Milgram, and Philip Zimbardo. The line experiment would be Solomon Asch. A. 43. The shock experiment is B. Stanley Milgram in the 1960s. 44. The prison experiment. That was Philip Zimbardo in Stanford University. How long was the prison experiment supposed to last? That it was supposed to last for 2 weeks, C. But it actually lasted for 6 days, B. What percentage of people went all the way to 450 volts in the shock experiment? That was D, 2/3 or 67%. They did 12 people, so it was 8 out of 12 that went all the way. 48. What percentage of people did psychologists think would go all the way to 450 volts before the experiment was conducted? Also, when I talked to this class and the other sociology class, I asked you the same question, and all of you also said probably less than 1%. So A is the answer that you thought, and psychologists at the time also thought. 49. The bystander effect says that A, as more people are around, each person is less likely to help in a situation. 50. In the line experiment. Let me think to make sure I get this right. Yeah, it is A. 90% of people got all the answers correct when they were alone, but it dropped to only 25% got all the answers correct when in a group. For the Solomon-Asch line experiment, conformity experiment. There are 2 questions about capitalism, socialism, and communism. You just need to know that communism is theoretical complete economic equality. Socialism, the definition is the government owns the means of production, although in reality it gets much messier than that in terms of when people say socialism and what that actually means. But capitalism is complete freedom to own what you want, but much more economic inequality. 52 we will not do because we didn't cover that this semester. Actually, 53 should be on the final, but it's not. So cross that out also. That's unfortunate. 53, 52, 3, and 4 are all not on the final. And 55. So the only thing in this list that's on the final is 51. Communism, socialism, and capitalism. There will be a free response question about the prisoner's dilemma or the social trap. There will not be this. And just real quick, and this is all we're going to do on this Zoom, but the prisoner's dilemma or the social trap is any situation where it's in your best interest to be selfish, but in the collective best interest to cooperate. So that would be, we talked about AT&T and Verizon, and it'd be in their individual best interest to advertise for themselves, but if they're the only 2 players in the cell phone game, if none of them advertise, they'd still spend less money and still get half the clients. Same thing about weapons. It's in like America and Russia. If nobody has any nuclear weapons, that's fantastic. And that's best for the world. But if Russia doesn't have any nuclear weapons, it's still better for the United States to have nuclear weapons because that gives them an advantage. But if America has nuclear weapons, it's better for Russia to have nuclear weapons. And then both of us have a lot of nuclear weapons, and we're back at square one because we're both equally powerful, except the world loses because everyone has nukes. You can also talk about the red and black game we played where you always got more points for playing the red card against your partner, but everybody got more points for playing the black card.